Hello and welcome to the Healthy Pathways presentation on the new Dietary Guidelines for Americans 2015 to 2020 edition. And there's been a lot of press about the guidelines since they were first released in January of this year. And for me, it's been exciting and interesting to prepare for this and learn about it and read about all of the comments made. So I hope you find the topic as interesting and helpful to your lives as I did as I was preparing. And my name is Brenda Bishop. I'm the health educator at our St. Louis site, and I've been a registered dietitian for the last 19 years and a certified diabetes educator for the last 16 years. The focus of my work has been on helping people make lifestyle changes that promote weight loss and prevent the development of diabetes and related complications. And I've been with Centene for almost 5 years. And I hope by the end of the presentation that you'll know the answers to these questions. Why do the new 2015 dietary guidelines matter? What are the new guidelines? How have these guidelines evolved since being introduced in 1980? And who is talking about the 2015 edition and what are they saying? And where can I find some resources? And there will also be an opportunity for people here in St. Louis to ask questions at the end. And for anyone who is watching on the Healthy Pathways website, please feel free to email me or give me a call if you have any further questions after viewing this. So the dietary guidelines are issued and updated every 5 years, and they are published by the U.S. Department of Agriculture in cooperation with the Health and Human Service Department. And they are based on current scientific evidence. So kind of the process begins with a special dietary guidelines advisory committee. And for this one, it was made up of 15 experts in the field of health and nutrition. And they did a thorough research of all of the science that had been issued since the 2010 guidelines. And then they made recommendations based on this research, and then it was made available to the public, and public comments were made prior to the issuing by the Joint Departments of Agriculture and Health and Human Services. And the guidelines are really designed for policymakers and health professionals and nutrition professionals rather than the general public. And so they serve as a basis for all of the nutrition policies and programs. So they are very important for the consumer, but the actual guidelines are not directed to them. So for example, the impact it has on the general public. It's the basis for the school breakfast and lunch programs, the program we can think of as WIC, the Special Supplemental Nutrition Programs for Women, Infants, and Children. The VA uses these guidelines. Administration on Aging for all of the community programs for older Americans. Department of Defense follows these guidelines for their menu planning and nutrition programs. And health professionals, such as myself, dietitians, use the guide in our recommendations. So a lot of the educational materials that are provided by these different nutrition groups and professional groups are based on these guidelines. So you may remember the pyramid. That was based on the guidelines, the plate method. So there will be a lot more consumer tools that will be coming out in the next few months. Right now, actually, this is about the handout that I gave you is about the only consumer information from the government that we have right now, but there will be a lot more. The plate method will stay in effect. And I think it's important to keep in mind that the goal of the guidelines is to help individuals improve and maintain overall health. And ultimately, we want to prevent chronic diseases. It's not designed to treat diseases, but rather prevent chronic disease, which is a huge problem: obesity, heart disease, diabetes, etc. And so here's kind of a summary of what the guidelines have looked like since 1980. Some of you may be familiar with some. I remember the AIM, Build, and Choose, and then the 2005, and then the 2010. And 2005 and 2010 were huge booklets. It started out just as kind of a single page back in the 80s. And this chart kind of gives you an idea of how they've evolved. And so the first guidelines had 7 basic guidelines. And if we think about them, if we follow these are pretty good. So eat a variety of foods, maintain an ideal weight is what they suggested. Avoid too much fat, saturated fat and cholesterol. Eat foods with adequate starch and fiber. Avoid too much sugar, avoid too much sodium. If you drink alcohol, do so in moderation. Some of the changes over the years, more moderation was included. Choosing a diet. In 1995, the idea of physical activity as a part of a healthy eating pattern, primarily to help maintain weight, was added. And then since then, physical activity has also been a component. Whole grains were added in 2000. The idea of nutrient-dense foods, we'll talk about that more later, was introduced. And so some key things then in 2010, the idea of eating patterns, which has now become a focus as well. And so the 2015 guidelines are built around 5 key guidelines, and then there are recommendations that go into more detail. So the overall emphasis of the guidelines is building a healthy eating pattern. And by a healthy eating pattern, it refers to a combination of all of the foods and beverages that make up a person's complete dietary intake over time. And the idea is that we do not eat foods in isolation, but in combination. So there really aren't any magic foods. So we hear a lot over the years, eat or have more olive oil. So really it's about olive oil within that whole eating pattern, not just olive oil by itself. And so examples of healthy eating patterns would be the DASH diet. We had talked about that a few years ago, dietary approaches to stop hypertension. And then the healthy U.S. eating pattern, which is probably a term it's not used common, but it is based on the 2010 guidelines. And so that's still a part of the guidelines today. And what they added this year, they added 2 new healthy eating patterns, the healthy Mediterranean style eating pattern and the healthy vegetarian eating pattern. So those are 2 big changes this year. We'll talk more about those later on too. But the reason that the focus is now on eating patterns is because the research that shows that it's not kind of the single foods, but the research on foods and prevention of chronic disease and overall health are related to eating patterns. So you may have remembered the DASH eating pattern, for example. What that showed is that people that followed a pattern high in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and dairy could reduce their blood pressure. So it's the total eating pattern, which is good, I think. And then also another key part of the guidelines is the focus on variety, nutrient density, and amount. And when you think of nutrient density, you can think of foods that are nutrient dense, and that is the idea that the food contains the nutrients and other beneficial substances without being diluted by the addition of calories from added fats, from added sugars, or refined starches, or even by solid fats. And so that are naturally present in the food. So I like to think of nutrient-dense foods as being as close to nature as possible. examples would be plain non-fat yogurt with frozen unsweetened strawberries. That would be a nutrient-dense food versus strawberry-flavored whole yogurt with sugar added, not as nutrient-dense. A baked potato with olive oil on it versus French fries. Old-fashioned oatmeal would be a nutrient-dense food with maybe some cinnamon on it as well versus the package of instant oatmeal with brown sugar that you would open. That would not be as nutrient-dense a food. And so whole foods is kind of the key without being diluted. And then another key guideline is to limit calories from added sugars and saturated fats and reduce sodium intake. So based on a 2,000 calorie diet, if we look at the recommendation of less than 10% of the calories per day from added sugar for 2,000 calories, that would be less than 50 grams of added sugar. And an example of 50 grams would be a can of soda, which has 41 grams of added sugar. A tablespoon of sugar has 12 grams of added sugar. So right there, if you have a couple of cups of coffee with sugar and a soda pop each day, you are probably over the limit, and that's for if you 2,000 calories would be recommended. And there is a difference between natural sugars and added sugars. By added sugars, I mean things like honey is an added sugar, high fructose corn syrup, table sugar, brown sugar, fructose, glucose, if you see on the label. Those are added sugars. And that is what's recommended to be reduced because there's really not much, there's not any nutrition except calories. Then that is different than natural sugars. So natural sugars occur in fruit. Natural sugars occur in milk and yogurt, and also in, there's some in vegetables as well. And when we think of these sugars, those are natural, and those are not what's recommended to reduce. It's just the added sugars, because when we have fruit, we're also getting lots of other nutrients such as vitamin C, potassium, fiber. So then that would be considered a nutrient-dense food. Table sugar would not. So currently, when you look at labels, you can't tell if a product is added or if the product has added sugars or natural sugars. If you look at on the nutrition fact statement, and it will say sugars. So that is one change that's been proposed, and it probably will be occurring where you can tell the difference if it's an added sugar or a natural sugar. Right now, you'd have to actually look at the list of ingredients to tell if it's an added sugar, and you would look for terms like sugar, high fructose corn syrup, honey, brown sugar. So that was a key change, is this idea about added sugars and limiting those. Then another key part then of the guideline, it's recommended that less than 10% of calories per day come from saturated fat. Saturated fat is found in animal products, and also coconut oil, palm kernel oil, and palm oil are the vegetable fats that have saturated fat in them. So an example, if it was recommended that you have 2,000 calories a day, and less than 10% would actually be just 22 grams of saturated fat. And here would be an example day. 2 slices of bacon, which would be 5 grams, a single slice of like American cheese, that would be 2.5 grams of saturated fat, a 6-ounce hamburger would be 4.5 grams, and a cup of ice cream would be 10 grams. So right there, you're just a little over, or I think it's even to 22 grams. And again, these are associated with preventing chronic disease. That's why the recommendation is from that, based on the research. Also, it's recommended to limit sodium to less than 2,300 milligrams per day. And a teaspoon of salt has about 2,300 milligrams to kind of give you a reference point. And when you're looking at labels, then you can kind of keep that in your mind. 2,300 milligrams, and this can of soup has 800 milligrams. Well, that's, you know, about a third of the amount for the day. So that's kind of just a reference as you're looking for at labels and things. The fourth key guideline then is to shift to healthier food and beverage choices. And shift is kind of the key word, I think. It's the idea that you start where you're at and you slowly move to a healthier version. So for example, I like to think of being on a spectrum. So at one end of the spectrum, you might have 2,000 calories, basically of soda pop, cheese puffs, and beef sticks. You could survive on that, but not very healthy. So then at the other end of the spectrum is only foods that are nutrient dense. So whole fruits, vegetables, beans, maybe 100% whole grains. So the idea is we want to shift people along the spectrum to healthier options. And I like that too because it's more sustainable than recommending that everyone get to that one end of the spectrum that we want to shift over. The fifth guideline is about supporting healthy eating patterns for all, and that would be at the all levels, the community level, government level, corporate level, so encouraged having healthy foods, which we do. We have a nice cafe with some healthy food options. And also then at more of an individual role of modeling healthy food choices for your family. So we all have a role. And when we look closer at what that healthy eating pattern includes, it includes a variety of vegetables. So we want things dark green, so lots of broccoli, red and orange vegetables, carrots, and then legumes, so beans and peas. And then starchy food is okay. Potatoes are healthy for you. They do have more calories than broccoli, but they are still have a lot of good nutrients in them. Fresh is fine. Frozen vegetables are wonderful. And again, we want to look at as natural as possible. So frozen without being diluted with high-fat cheese sauces, diluted with lots of sodium and sauces. Canned can work as well, and dried vegetables. It's recommended that 2.5 cups a day for a 2,000 calorie a day diet. Fruits, especially whole fruits, fresh, frozen, canned, and dried are fine. A lot of people will ask me about canned fruit, and canned fruit is healthy for you. Look for ones that are in their own natural juices, or even maybe with a little light syrup rather than heavy syrup. And those would have less sugar. I have really been into frozen fruit lately because fresh fruit is we're kind of in between right now. And well, just last night I was snacking on my favorite snack, which is I get frozen sweet dark cherries, and I just eat them frozen, and I just love them. And then also I'll get frozen strawberries. And just snack on frozen strawberries or add them to yogurt. And I get large kind of bins as a staple of plain non-fat Greek yogurt, and then I use that as a substitute for sour cream, and then I also will add fresh fruit to it, or frozen fruit a lot of times, and then I'll bring it to work, and it'll be my 3 o'clock snack, and that frozen fruit is kind of thawed out and makes a nice treat. And then a healthy eating pattern includes grains, and it's recommended that at least half of the grains be whole grains. And if you want to go more, that's even healthier. So a food would be considered 100% whole grain if it contains the whole grain, which would be the bran, the endosperm, and the germ. Examples, popcorn is a whole grain. And again, when we think of that spectrum of nutrient-dense foods, popcorn that you would pop yourself in maybe a little canola oil or olive oil would be a more nutrient-dense food than perhaps the microwave bag, because that would be more diluted with sodium and other chemicals. Oatmeal is a whole grain, brown rice, quinoa, 100% whole wheat. And as you're looking at labels and things, whole grains would be on the outside of the label. They're not listed on the nutrition facts. But just to kind of give you a reference idea, an ounce equivalent of a whole grain product, it has 16 grams of whole grains. So sometimes on the outside of labels, they'll show how many whole grains are in a product. 16 would be 1 ounce equivalent. For a 2,000 calorie a day diet, that it's recommended about 6 ounces of grain products. And for 50%, you would want 48 grams a day of whole grains. Up to 96 would be 100% whole grains. Corn tortillas are another good whole grain. And a healthy eating pattern includes fat-free or low-fat dairy. And this also includes fortified soy products. However, it does not include things like coconut milk and almond milk because they don't have the same nutrient profile that fortified soy products would have, or yogurt or milk. For the U.S. Dietary Healthy Eating Plan that I mentioned earlier, it's recommended that 3 cups a day for adults. If we go to the Healthy Eating Mediterranean diet, it's just 2 cups. And that's based on age 9 to 18 years of age. And a healthy eating pattern also includes a variety of protein. So there's more inclusion now of seafood, legumes, focus on lean meats and poultry, soy products. Seafood now, it's recommended that you have at least 8 ounces a week. Might be salmon, 4-ounce salmon twice a week, or tuna is also another good source. I've started eating sardines because they are a great source of omega-3 fatty acids, and so I'm having 1 sardine on a cracker, like a whole grain cracker with a little mustard on it. That's my new food for the year, sardines. And does anyone else like sardines? Oh. Well, I'll have 1 sardine. Yeah, do you eat a lot more? Well, that's great. Yeah. Well, I try to eat it within a few days because it's only going to last a few days. But I'll have a couple. Yeah. But yeah, how do you eat your sardines? Okay, so hot sauce. Okay, I'll have to try it with hot sauce. So we have mustard and hot sauce on sardines and crackers, and it's a great source of omega-3 fatty acids, yeah. And then nuts and seeds are also a good source of protein because they are a high fat content. Actually, half an ounce of nuts would be considered the equivalent of an ounce of protein. A healthy eating pattern includes oils. Canola oil, olive oil, nuts, seeds, seafood, avocados are wonderful. And for a 2,000 calorie a day diet, about 5 teaspoons. Coconut oil, palm kernel oil, and palm oil are not included in this because they are a saturated fat primarily. So avocados on sandwiches are wonderful, and just avocados and eating plain. So a healthy eating pattern will limit added sugars, saturated fats, trans fats, and trans fats then they do occur naturally in foods, but primarily we're looking at the manufactured trans fats. You may have heard the term partially hydrogenated. That's what a trans fat is. So manufacturers will take an oil, which is healthy, and they will chemically alter it to make it solid. And then they put it in products because it prolongs the shelf life and it tastes good. So when you think of kind of stick margarine, that's would have partially hydrogenated. And there's a lot of movement in manufacturing to completely get rid of that, because it's been shown that trans fats can actually decrease your good cholesterol, the HDL, while increasing the LDL. So trying to avoid trans fats is good, healthy. Also, in tandem with the recommendations, it's recommended that we all meet the physical activity guidelines for Americans, and that is to help achieve and maintain a healthy body weight and reduce the risk of chronic diseases. And those guidelines then for adults up to age 64, we want to avoid inactivity. Try to get at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity. So that would be 5 days a week of walking for 30 minutes, or 5 days a week of walking twice a day for 15 minutes. So you can break it down if you don't have 30 minutes. And also 2 or more days per week of muscle strengthening activity. So something to do with weights, something to yoga can be strength training as well as stretching. So those are the current recommendations for physical activity. And just to highlight some of those changes from the 2010 dietary guidelines. A key thing was limiting the added sugars. Include a variety of proteins. So adding the vegetarian eating pattern, more of an emphasis on including the beans and lean protein sources. And also it's mentioned in the guidelines about really limiting processed meat, things like sausages and bacon. So lean meats, choose a healthy eating pattern among your options. So again, thinking of that total picture of what you eat, the combination of foods. So the Mediterranean style, which is higher in seafood, a little lower in yogurt, high in whole grains, fruits, vegetables, and olive oil. A vegetarian diet without meats. And then there are different variations of vegetarian. Some include yogurt, some don't, some include eggs, and some don't. And then that 2010 USDA pattern. And a new big thing you may have heard about, moderate coffee consumption. So they looked at different research that looked at these eating patterns that include actually 3 to 5 cups of coffee a day, and they found that that was okay. It was healthy. There were perhaps some health benefits even of having coffee. And the sodium was adjusted a little bit in that for in 2010 there were more strict guidelines on sodium, and then in 2015 they suggested 2,300 milligrams for everyone except for those people who have diagnosis of hypertension, and there it's recommended to limit the sodium to 1,500, which if you start reading labels, that's difficult. 1,500 milligrams, yeah, it's hard to reach. So I went and I had fun with this, so I hope you enjoy this. I thought of a typical American diet and then compared it with kind of a remake. So a typical morning you might have sausage, egg, and cheese biscuit, 2 cups of coffee with creamer and sugar, and then you go to work and then there's a donut. So you have a donut and another cup of coffee with sugar. So actually, looking at this, it contributes half of the 2,000 calorie day intake, and it is high in sugar, sodium, so the sugar from added sugars. So you really, and the donut, of course, would have some high in sodium from that processed meat, and this was a frozen egg and cheese biscuit, and then high in saturated fat in the biscuit, in the sausage, and in the cream. And there's 0 whole grains. Then we do the morning remake. So old-fashioned oatmeal with walnuts, and I make this up in the microwave. Actually, this I did on the stove. And then I added some frozen strawberries, skim milk, and then a cup of coffee with some skim milk. And then this is actually my typical morning snack. I'll have some dry fruit and roasted nuts. And then another cup of coffee with some skim milk. And so here, this contributes just 1/4. And all of the grains here are whole grains, the oatmeal. There's no added sugar, no saturated fat or trans fat. And it includes whole fruits, nuts, and non-fat dairy. Then we look at perhaps a typical afternoon. So a beef and cheese sandwich on white bread with mayonnaise, pretzels, and then those snack pies that you can buy, sweet tea, again added sugar, and then 3 o'clock. That is the most common time for an afternoon snack. And if you look around the office, look about 3 o'clock and see everyone scrambling for a snack. And then a cola, so animal crackers. So we look at that. This is high in added sugars and saturated fat. So that would come from the added sugars, the sweet tea, and that snack pie. And then it would also be high in saturated fat. This is about, I think, 3 ounces of roast beef. And this, again, includes no whole grains, fruits, or vegetables. And animal crackers, actually, most of them in the vending machine are about 250 calories. It'll say like 110, but they're actually 2.5, I think, servings in a lot of times when you get those animal crackers from the vending machines. Then the afternoon remake. So I still had some beef, but I just reduced the beef to 1 ounce. I added hummus instead of mayonnaise, and hummus is a bean spread, and it actually makes a wonderful spread on a sandwich. And then vegetables instead of pretzels, an apple instead of the apple pie, and then water with some fruit in it, and then, tomatoes, and then avocado. So I put some avocado on the hummus sandwich. And then for 3 o'clock, I bring my usual yogurt with fruit, and then I keep toasted oats for snacks, and then honey, a little bit of honey. This remake contains whole fruits. It has dark green vegetables, orange vegetables, red, non-fat dairy. It has beans and healthy fats from the avocado. And again, all the grains are whole grains. And it's limited in saturated fat and added sugars. Then an evening, so you get home from work and you often grab something. Crackers and spinach dip are examples I showed. The classic St. Louis dish, pork steak grilled, baked potato with butter and sour cream, corn, some applesauce, and then ice cream. And this ice cream was just a cup of ice cream, and then chocolate syrup. So this actually contains more than half. So this is over 1,000 calories. We talked about healthy eating contributing to others. This really models less healthy food choices for family members. It's high in added sugars from the ice cream, from the chocolate sauce. Applesauce actually has added sugar as well. And it's low in whole grains. Actually, this doesn't have any whole grains. And it's very high in saturated fat. Pork steaks are really high saturated fat food. Then the remake, when you get home, a cheese stick, grilled salmon, baked potato, and on this baked potato I put non-fat plain Greek yogurt. A spinach salad with a little bit of olive oil and some tomatoes, whole grain garlic toast, and then my favorite, frozen cherries, and then dark chocolate with hot tea and no added sugar in the tea, and it was an herbal tea. So this models healthy eating. It contains dark green vegetables, whole fruits, whole grains, seafood, and this is very low in saturated fat. And if we look at this comparison, this typical diet that I showed you earlier, 4,100 calories. I used two sources because I looked at this and I couldn't believe that was 4,100 calories. But a lot of it is from that added sugar in the beverages and all those hidden fats and things. Then the remake was right at 2,000 calories, and then if over on the side you can look and see the comparison of added sugars, 178 grams in that top one, and the remake was 20 grams. And the limit then for 2,000 calories would be 50 grams, saturated fat 22 grams, and the saturated fat up above 80 grams, and then look at the sodium. So it's amazing. And so you may be thinking, what tools can I use to apply the guidelines? So there is this cool super tracker that I actually got that earlier graph from, and that's from the USDA. It uses the plate method. We'll see if I can go to it. That was probably not, I better not, okay. You can use that link and go to that tracker, and it allows you to enter your food, and then it will give you all of the graphs, those cool graphs that I showed you earlier. And then this other tool that I really like, this is the Old Ways cart. And the Old Ways that is the non-for-profit organization that sponsors the Mediterranean diet. And also the Grain Council is another one of their groups. But they have this cool site or portion of the site that it's the Old Ways cart. So it really takes the dietary guidelines and it gives you a week's worth of menus as well as a recipes, and that you could follow. And so it gives you the grocery list as well, which is nice. So if you want to check out that link, that's a good resource. And so then we look at what are the experts saying. And I don't know if you've been following some of the comments. There have been a lot of there have been some negatives in the press. And it's been a mixed result. The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, that's the organization I belong to, and they do provide evidence-based practical recommendations that focus on prevention, and these recommendations can help you live a longer and healthier life. And some of the controversy about it is that perhaps they didn't go far enough. But if people are following these, which most people are not, if they follow them, then that would be a positive health benefit. American Medical Association, extremely pleased that the new recommendations call for significantly reducing the amount of added sugars and sugar-sweetened beverages from the American diet, and that was a change to this year. The American Cancer Society did say by omitting specific diet recommendations such as eating less red and processed meat, these guidelines miss a critical and significant opportunity to reduce suffering and death from cancer. This has to do with the World Health Organization within the past year made recommendations and guidelines that said that processed meat was carcinogenic, and red meat probably was. And so part of that, it has to do with that. the American Cancer Society saying that. And one thing about the World Health Organization, they really didn't differentiate between types of red meat. They just kind of categorized all of them together. From the Mayo Clinic, despite some of these shortcomings, it is important to recognize that for most people, following the dietary guidelines will improve their nutritional status and health. And you can see by that sample eating days diet that I did, that is a shift from perhaps the typical diet that some people have. Dr. Dean Ornish, who is founder and president of Preventative Medicine Research Initiative, the Ornish diet, which has been shown to actually reduce or reverse atherosclerosis. His comment, I thought the guidelines in general were really good. I think that they are getting better every year that they come out. I like the fact that they include plant-based vegetarian diets as a healthy eating pattern. Cleveland Clinic, I like the approach for shifting unhealthy choices for healthier, more nutrient-dense options, but I feel this concept, though well-intended, is too broad and needs to be defined further. So part of this has to do with maybe having more foods versus nutrients. So here are some resources for you. The dietary guidelines, if you want to read those, it's pretty big. And the Mediterranean eating pattern for the dietary guideline site, as well as the site from Old Ways. Vegetarian eating pattern, the DASH eating pattern, dietary approaches to stop hypertension. Physical activity guidelines, Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics has some wonderful information that tips on healthy eating and things. And then Healthy Pathways, looking on that site, they have a lot of good resources. Coaching is also available through the Healthy Pathways site. And there are dietitians and exercise physiologists available that can help work with you on how to adopt these guidelines. So any questions at all? We're finishing in a good time. Yeah.
My numbers came down to like 217. Drum roll, please. This year it was 191.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jeanette. Thank you for sharing that. That is wonderful. That you, yeah, wonderful that changes can make a difference. So someone had just shared how she had been following some healthy eating changes and things, and it really made a difference in her cholesterol. And congratulations. Thanks for sharing. Thank you. Okay. Oh, yes. Another question? Thanks.
Yeah, are they still continuing with legislation like to restrict and ban trans fats from food products in the United States?
Yes, a good question about legislation to restrict and completely get rid of trans fats in our food supply. And yes, I believe it's there's still talk of that. Yeah, labeling is going to be changing soon. And there are, getting rid of the trans fat. One thing to keep in mind with trans fats, when you look at food products that say 0 trans fats on the nutrition facts label, manufacturers can actually put up to 0.5 grams of trans fat in a product and still say it's 0. So probably not an issue, except if you happen to be eating more than one portion, and if perhaps your whole day is a lot of processed food that you think may be 0 trans fat, but it actually has 0.5, then that can add up. So to actually determine if there's trans fats in a product, you have to look at the list of ingredients and look for terms partially hydrogenated is probably the key. Partially hydrogenated oils, and that would be in the list of ingredients. But more manufacturers are getting rid of trans fats because of this association with heart disease and effect on cholesterol.
And just the serving size for 2015, because the old serving size for like meat was like a deck card.
The serving sizes have not changed. The labeling may change. That's a big issue with the current labeling laws, is that they want to have more information on what the actual package that you would eat would be. Yeah. So the guidelines, and that was one thing they changed a couple of years ago, is rather than servings, they went with cups. So it's recommended 2 cups of fruit. 6-ounce equivalents of whole grains for 2,000 calorie a day diet. So yeah, that's a good point about they did kind of change then suggesting serving sizes to the actual amounts. So yeah, good point, thanks. Yeah. And okay, well, thank you all for coming, and this will end the presentation for Healthy Pathways webinar. And again, if people are watching the program on the Healthy Pathways site and you have any questions, please reach out to me, Brenda Bishop, and I'll be happy to talk more about this very interesting topic, I think, and the effect that it has on all of us. So thank you all very much.